Hello and welcome to the Buckets and Tea NBA show. I'm your host, Cathryn Naiker. Thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode. Today, I have, you know him, you love him. It's Raptors Republic's own Louis Zatzman. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing wonderfully. Thank you so much for having me. So much fun last time I was on. Just a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Oh, well, I always appreciate it. You actually bailed me out. I had another guest tell me they were sick, and then I messaged you at like 10 p.m. last night during the Clippers game being like, please be on my show. So I appreciate it a lot. Also, it really helped that the Raptors had a West Coast game because I knew all you guys were up and watching basketball, and that I could message you that late. So yeah, that really worked out.
Being awake, having a kid totally changes West Coast games. 3 years ago, I loved West Coast games. I was awake. I'm going to watch them. You know, like I'm up anyway. Nowadays, when I'm getting up at 7 a.m. anyway, I curse whoever invented time zones, whoever invented California, just the whole, it's awful.
Yeah, it's rough. I remember once I was working out in Nova Scotia, and they're half an hour ahead, and I was watching this like West Coast game, and then it went into overtime, and I was like losing my mind because I was like, I really want to watch this game, but it's like 1 a.m. and this game is still happening. And then I was just a mess the next day at work.
Yeah. I think you mean an hour. I'm from Nova Scotia.
Oh, they're an hour ahead.
It's Newfoundland that's a half hour.
Oh, yeah. Okay, there we go.
A demand of Confederation. They were like, we're not joining the country unless...
so you know, my apologies, East Coast Canada. My apologies.
Yeah, you're not forgiven.
I'm not forgiven?
No, the East Coast doesn't forget.
Okay, well, thanks for joining me this week, Louis. But yeah, the West Coast games can be tough. We're going to get into all of that later during our Raptors segment. We're going to get into Fred's rant about the refs for sure. But first, we got to start with some big NBA news, and that is Kevin Durant went down last night during a pre-game warm-up. As of this recording, we're still trying to figure out exactly what's happening. He's having an MRI later today. People are saying it's going to be 4 to 6 weeks, but I don't think that's been quite official yet. But it does sound like he'll probably be out for the rest of the regular season. This was supposed to be his first home game in Phoenix. So that's pretty heartbreaking news just as an NBA fan, because you want to see someone like Kevin Durant healthy and competing, and considering this trade that they just made and all the assets they gave up to have Kevin Durant, this is going to, what an emotional roller coaster for Phoenix Suns fans.
3-0 since they traded for him, and he's looked just like staggeringly good. Yeah, it sucks because they don't really have the roster anymore equipped to super survive without him. Like, they were not really that good. From the trade deadline on, they lost a lot of games before Durant got there. A lot of games. So, they're not, I don't think they're going to enter the playoffs with a really good seed anymore. They're now
they're fourth. They're fourth currently.
Yeah, they're fourth currently. I could see them falling, right? I know this is like the 151st most important thing, probably lower than that. I was working on a piece for Durant for 538 that was it was mostly done. Just about how they've changed his game. It was like a 2-part series with Kyrie Irving, just about how teams implement stars and like how you ask them to change their game or you change their system, or they were sort of contrasting. And so, yeah, that sucks. That's, the piece obviously might be changed, probably going to be scrapped depending on the injury news, but
that sucks.
Important income, also just like lost time. So, clearly not as important as it is for for the Suns or for the staff or even for Phoenix fans, but just somewhere way down the line in importance that sucks.
You know what? I understand it though, because so in November I went to LA for a bit and I was meeting up with this with a basketball writer, and we were gonna like hang out and all this stuff. And then like Kyrie Irving's like anti-Semitic rants go off, and then suddenly this guy's like, actually, like, I can't. And I'm like, no, this guy ruined my plans.
Yeah.
Isn't that the most important part about his anti-Semitic rants?
Your plan. Well, the
That
thing
he
about
ruined
it
my
is
plans.
we can only filter events through the prism of our experience. Like, we have empathy,
Of course.
but we don't have hive mind. Like, we can't understand things through other people. We can try to, but we can't actually do it. And so as much as we offer empathy, the understanding is only through ourselves. So it matters to you, of course, that it ruined your plans, and it should matter because you are you and your plans are yours.
Thank you. No, but I mean, in all seriousness, like with Durant, like it does really suck. And I do feel like this season has, I mean, like a lot of seasons, but it just really feels like a lot of teams have been deeply impacted by injuries. Like now we have this whole Phoenix Suns thing, but you also have like Zion with the Pelicans, who's still out, and, you know, Lonzo Ball needing another surgery on his knee. So last I read is that he's going to be out for another 6 months after that surgery happens. So, I mean, we already knew he was out for the season anyways, but that just means he's not going to have the summer to, regain that strength. Like he's going to have to do that as the season's starting. So, yeah, I mean, that's just heartbreaking news as always. And yeah, I mean, it does absolutely affect their championship status because we went from they're the favorites suddenly to not. Like, I don't know if that's what you were writing in your piece. Was it after the Dallas game?
No, so it was just about like how some teams, when they get a star, change the whole structure of the team to match that. Whereas the Suns were just kind of saying, you're just going to do what Bridges did, but instead of Mikal Bridges, you're Kevin Durant.
Right.
And it was really interesting because he was touching the ball way less than he was in Brooklyn. He was running fewer pick and rolls. He had way fewer isolations. Like they were not changing the structure of the team at all. But because he's Kevin Durant, it just doesn't matter. He's just so good. You don't need to change the structure. If you only give him a couple touches, he's still so valuable that, like, he was shooting, like, he had a 70% effective field goal percentage. He was just making every shot he took, even if it wasn't a lot of shots. So no, it's just about how you implement a new player. But honestly, I did see them as probably the champion, or the West, the favorite out of the West. And now if they, like, let's say they sink, maybe they have to face, a team like, actually, I don't know. The West isn't that good. As long as you don't fall to 8th, as long as you don't have to play Denver in the first round and you have time for him to come back, you still have a chance. But, I mean, somebody's going to get Sacramento in second or third, some low-ranked seed.
Which is wild. They are second in the West right now.
And Sacramento's really good, but because they don't have playoff experience, whoever's going to face Sacramento rather than Denver is going to be like thanking their lucky stars,
Right. I completely agree. And yeah, I mean, also too, we don't know how long he's going to be out. So like he could be back for the first round, or he could, maybe the second round. Like we don't know the severity of it just yet. But if it's 4 to 6 weeks, then yeah, he would be back for a second round. So you're absolutely right. They just need to be able to kind of like hold down this fort for as long as they can and pray for a decent first round matchup. I mean, right now, 4-5 is the Warriors. So that would be bad, I think.
that would be bad.
That would be bad. I mean, I know they don't have a good road record, and that's baffled many, including myself. But yeah, that would be bad. So yeah, we'll have to see what happens there. But it's just wild how this keeps twisting and turning, and I had to mention it. Also, this past week, some wild news about Ja Morant. We've all seen it, I'm sure, but he had a gun at a Colorado nightclub, and he posted it on IG, as young guys do. And he's been suspended for several games. I've been reading this morning that it's another 4 games. I don't know if that's subject to change or not. But really, I think what's most important here is that there's been a pattern of behavior with Ja Morant that has been revealed more or less in the last week. So in the summer, there was an incident at a mall where he brought like 8 of his friends to some security guards because his mom was having some trouble. And details on that are not totally clear as to, like what kind of trouble was his mom having at the mall, stuff like that. I don't know. There's a second incident where he allegedly beat up a 17-year-old at a pickup game, which only came to light recently because now there's a lawsuit about it. And then, of course, there was the laser that was pointed at a Pacers bus. So this is now 4 incidences total since the summer that we know about. And, I think it's good that Ja Morant is taking the time. Like I thought his statement, I'm pretty cynical when it comes to these statements personally, but I will say it was the right thing to do and it was the right thing to say. There is self-accountability in the statement, and that's important. And as Drake says, he says no new friends, but I think that's easier when you come from Forest Hill. It's possible Ja Morant needs new friends. I'm saying maybe. I don't know exactly who his friends are. I don't think they listen to this podcast, but it's possible. I think he needs to start surrounding himself with better people that are looking out for him and his best interests.
Yeah. So there's so many things that tie up. When we talk about celebrity and moral judgment of actions, I think the first take I always have is that the concept of mythology and celebrity and idolizing people is ridiculous anyway. And we just shouldn't look to celebrities as icons, as a virtuous people by virtue of celebrity. Ties into the Protestant ethic to make it sort of nerdy, which is where the concept of your situation in life is a reflection of your inner circumstances, your soul. Like rich people should be are better because they're rich. And I think that everyone sees that as ridiculous. We're well beyond that. We're not in the 1600s anymore. But a lot of that hasn't left us. We do, of course, North America is extraordinarily influenced by Protestant ethics in many, many ways. And I do think we do see celebrities as better or at least worth listening to. And I really push back against that. And, we were talking about Kyrie Irving earlier. And I'm Jewish. I didn't really care, first of all, because I don't care what Kyrie Irving thinks. He said about the media, I shouldn't have to talk to pawns or I'm too important for, I honestly think that way about as I have a master's in history. I trust my own brain. I think a lot about philosophical things. And I haven't gotten any indication that Kyrie Irving is someone who is worth my time debating concepts. I just don't care what he thinks about Jews. It doesn't obviously it matters to the world because a lot of people do. And so there's impact, right? But in a perfect world, it just doesn't matter because his opinion is unimportant. Now, I do want to emphasize he's done a lot of good. Obviously, his contributions to charity are huge. That doesn't make you an intellectual, though. Those are very different. And so to make it about Ja Morant, because that's a huge I'm really dragging on. I'm sorry. To make it about Ja Morant, though, he hasn't really committed any crimes. Maybe he did by beating up a 17-year-old, but the guy threw the ball at him he hasn't done anything that. If my friend did, let's say, I would be I'm not like, I can't hang out with you. You're a bad person. Or so obviously I don't want people waving guns around in the strip club. I live in Canada. The States loves guns. A lot of people who are criticizing him, they have guns. They wave guns around for fun all the time at the shooting range or whatever. I don't do that, but I understand there's differences in the way people live their lives. And I don't look to Ja Morant as a person who, I just don't care what he does on the weekend. Like, okay, if he's drinking a lot, I don't care because I care about his basketball game. That being said, if he's having a tough time with alcoholism or whatever has been reported, that sucks. I want him to be happy, and I hope that he's able to find better, because celebrity is really hard. I don't think the human brain is equipped to handle celebrity. It's just crazy what it does to you. And so, I hope he is well. I think a lot of people are sort of, a lot of like First Take, ESPN things have really, really blown out of proportion what he's doing. The life he's like, the slippery slope is considered a logical fallacy for a reason. And just because he might be on a path that you don't like doesn't mean he's at the end of the path. Like, so, Ja Morant obviously has had a rough go of it. He's had a lot of things that people look down on. The laser pointer thing is insane. I wish there was a better explanation for that.
Yeah.
With the Indiana coaches. But ultimately, I'm still happy to root for him. Kyrie Irving, I think I'm not gonna I would prefer if he didn't succeed as a Jew. I think he was probably overpunished professionally. I don't see why he was suspended. But like socially, he should be getting booed probably for saying what he said, for promoting what he promoted. Ja Morant, I see no reason for fans to boo him, for example. Well,
I don't think they will. I don't think they're the same. Not at all.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Hope he's doing well. Hope he comes back and plays basketball. The NBA is more fun, more exciting with him in it. But we know too much about celebrities, and celebrities know too much about us. You're on Twitter. People at celebrities so much. Like, man, have thousands of fans who are betting on you to yell at you for like every shot you miss. That would screw up your brain, man. It's just hard. Life is hard. Even for people with all this money, life is hard.
I think you said a lot of great things here, and I think you made a lot of some nonsense, but a lot of great things. No, I think you make a lot of great points. I mean, I will say that with Ja, I think this social media post is probably the best thing that ever happened to him, because A, nobody got hurt. And B, it's
important point.
It's this, like I said, that's a pattern. I'm sorry, but those incidences, that's a pattern. And I think it's forced that pattern to stop in its tracks, hopefully, before it gets too far. I want to believe that he sees this as a problem. I really want to believe that, because this is a problem, because even if you're not being violent, which, except for this kid during that game, we don't know. I don't think he has being violent, but being surrounding yourself with that is not good. Mm-hmm. It's just not. So yeah, I don't think anyone should boo him. He's not getting canceled. It's nothing like that. But I just think this was ultimately good, because it's forced him to take some pause, I think.
Yeah. And I think it's worth mentioning. I think I saw the police said there's nothing to prosecute.
Yeah, he's not being prosecuted because, from what I understand, in Colorado, you can carry guns, but you're not supposed to be under the influence. But there's no evidence that he was under the influence.
Which is an important point. If he didn't hurt anybody and he didn't break the law, it's clearly not something that we should aspire to. It's weird. And you're right. It's bad, but it's not that bad.
No, but the totality of those multiple events, everything that we know of, right? So that means there could be more that we're not aware of.
I mean, there could be, there might not be though. It's just you know, more than anything, I think it's important not to blow it out of proportion, and you're not doing that, by the way. You made a point of saying he didn't hurt anybody, which is really good and important to say. I just think a lot of the conversation around it has been as if he did, or as if he was going to jail for a long, like none of that has happened, right?
I thought it was weird when the police were like, "Oh, we're investigating this now." I felt like they just did that as a formality for their own BS. That's how that felt to me personally, because I was just like, "What are you even investigating? Like nothing happened." But I think they were just doing that to cover their own butts because it's a thing that went viral. That's all.
Viral, like I don't know about the police in Colorado.
Yeah, that's just my opinion. Yeah,
don't have a lot of resources to investigate anything. There's not a lot of police investigations outside of TV. That's not a thing that really happens unless there's like someone hurt. Nonviolent crimes don't get investigated. That's just like not a thing. Apparently, unless it's celebrities going viral on Insta.
Yeah, or something going viral on Insta because it makes them look bad. They think. I wasn't thinking about the police at all, personally.
No.
I wasn't thinking this makes the Colorado police look bad. Like I definitely was not thinking that.
They can do enough to make themselves look bad.
Yeah, I mean, I just think I think it's ultimately good that Ja Morant is taking some time. And I do hope that he can curb some of this behavior in the right direction, because I just don't think surrounding yourself with this, let's call it an energy, let's call it an aura. You know what I mean? It's just not good for you. It's just not good for you.
No doubt.
All right, cool. Appreciate it. Okay, we have another serious topic before we get into our Raptors talk. Earlier this week, there was a very heated debate about the MVP race. Nikola Jokic, currently, some say a favorite to win his third MVP in a row, something that is fairly unprecedented in NBA history. Kendrick Perkins went on to say that he believes the voters have a racial bias, and that is why he's getting this attention. This debate also went viral. It got heated. Also, ESPN has now issued a correction, because during that rant, Kendrick Perkins said that 80% of the voting body for MVP is white, and that's not actually true. Now, I wasn't actually able to find what are the exact percentages, but the statement I read just says it's more diverse than he thought. So I don't actually know what that means. But just for the sake of clarity here, that part of his statement wasn't accurate. I mean, I think I think recognizing racial bias is always a valuable conversation to have. But I want to know what you think. Like, how did you feel when you saw all this?
Yeah, again, there's so much wrapped up in it. I think in North America, probably in the world, I just don't know the culture of the world, but it definitely where we live. Racial bias is inextricable from society. Can't be separated. So I think JJ Redick going on First Take, for example, and saying there's no racial bias, I don't think you can make that claim about anything. Like if you're having any conversation where race is involved, you just can't assume it doesn't factor in. At the same time, I don't think there's any proof or evidence that Nikola Jokic is undeserving of an MVP. So it creates this extremely ships in the night conversation where one side of the conversation says, well, racial bias is real, which is very true. And so dismissing it is ridiculous, which is very true. And the other side of the conversation says, Nikola Jokic is a deserving MVP. So what the hell are we talking about here? Which is also very true. And the two ships are just, they're way apart. There's no conversation. Because if they were actually speaking to each other, there would need to be some empirical information about in what ways racial bias is impacting either Nikola Jokic as an MVP or Dirk Nowitzki or Steve Nash, who are right, the three white MVPs of the last few decades. And I just think they're all extraordinary players. Mm-hmm. Nikola Jokic in particular, you can quibble with Steve Nash. I think Dirk Nowitzki was an extremely deserving MVP. Jokic is a deserving MVP. So to say people are voting for him because they're white is a ridiculous way to frame bias. And that's not how, systemic racism works. It's very easy to say they're not racist. Well, no one's like, the smart discussion isn't saying they're racist. The smart discussion is like our subconscious understanding of people influences decisions. It's just no one is having the conversation that matters, that's real, or is actually taking place with other people. So we just end up with a bunch of people shouting at nothing. And I think a really important point about sports writers, myself included, is they know sports, but not a whole lot they're not equipped to report on other elements of the world. And so, when the George Floyd protests happened, and a lot of the NBA players were, there was a lot of conversation about how to handle that within the NBA. Some players wanted to quit the bubble. They ended up wearing jerseys with slogans on them and all sorts of other things, kneeling. Basketball reporters had no idea how to report on that. It was actually kind of pathetic. Just the overall like ESPN broad debate about it was really juvenile. And I think a lot of the actual reporters who understand race relations and labor movements and anti-police protests, because a lot was wrapped up together going on in Minneapolis and elsewhere, had much more interesting things to say. But it's just out of the frame of basketball. But it's out of the frame of basketball writers. And I think we're seeing that now. Is like no basketball writer or reporter or talking head has anything interesting to say. Even though it's a worthwhile conversation, no one is having the conversation that's worthwhile.
What's the conversation you would like to see?
I think the conversation, very good question, by the way. The conversation is about in what ways, race and subconscious bias does impact the world around us. People aren't talking about. Well, some people are. I've seen some people talking, but in general, that's not what they're talking about on First Take. They're talking about what percentage of voters are white or not white. Guess what? These subconscious biases impact all sorts of people. You don't have to be white to have white-leaning worldviews. You see that all the time with police violence against non-white people. Oftentimes, the police aren't white themselves. It's a complex thing to try to discuss how the world around us is impacted by our interior selves. And I don't think any of the complexity is being shown.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I think, it is really complex and it is hard to convey everything, especially on a show like First Take, where it's inherently designed for debate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And not necessarily
because it's not a topic with a winner.
Yes, exactly. It's not a topic. It's not about winning the conversation.
Yeah.
And it's greater than sports. I mean, I do think if I bring this back to the NBA for a bit, I think the MVP award is so like subjective and abstract in a way that other awards are not. Right? Because it's like, oh, is it the best player or is it who's most valuable? And then people have different definitions of what it means to be valuable. And, how much should playoff success matter for a regular season award and this and that, where like when something like defensive player of the year, it's just, okay, who played the best defense this year? Right. Like it doesn't get complicated by like, have they won a championship before? And like, what was their previous success and what were their numbers last year and things like that. Like the MVP award gets so in my opinion, unnecessarily complicated and convoluted. And I don't like how the goalpost for this award keeps shifting in terms of what people's individual criteria for it are. And I think when it is so subjective like that, you're leaving the door open for people to think that there's something nefarious happening, right? Like racism. And I think if the award just had a clear mandate behind it, or clear criteria, I should say, in terms of like what actually qualifies for this award, like how much does leadership matter? How much does, points matter? I mean, I know those things are like hard to equate, and basketball is a highly nuanced sport, so there should always be room for some nuance. Absolutely. But I just feel like people need to know what this award is. And it's a frustrating debate every year.
And it's frustrating because so many sides ossify and just say, we're right. And if you don't agree with us, you're wrong, which really doesn't lend itself to productive conversation. For me, I have no trouble with Nikola Jokic winning the MVP award. I think he's a deserving candidate. I also don't if he doesn't win. I think if Giannis Antetokounmpo wins, I think he's also a very deserving candidate. Mm-hmm. I think the concept of this person has to win because he is the highest EPM or because of his efficiency. I think that's not the award, as you say, is not defined. And so the definition is not you have the best single number metric. I think that's not the definition of the award. No one ever said that's the award. And so you have the highest EPM VORP. People make fun of VORP because it's a funny word. But, a lot of the anti-metric guys say, whoa, you have the highest VORP. Cool, VORP. That's people make fun of that from the analytics side, but there's truth to that. It's like, who said VORP wins the MVP? Since when did the highest VORP win the MVP? Why is that?
What is VORP exactly? Just
value over replacement player. It's a single number that says your contribution to winning is 20, it's 17, it's 30, whatever. It's just one number.
It's like an advanced over under.
It's an advanced. It's an advanced stat. Yeah, it's using over under and box score, box plus minus, or win shares per 48. All these things. It's just one number saying you did this. But you're absolutely right. There's no definition, and so by not defining it, you can have a conversation as varied as it's VORP or it's racial bias. And those two things, how are those two things supposed to talk to each other? There's just no conversation between VORP and racial bias. It's just not a logical battlegrounds for conversation.
Yeah, I also, it's also notoriously a highly narrative driven award. And I felt like going into this season, everyone was basically like, this is Luka's award to take. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then he didn't take it. Right. And then I think
he's been scoring I think he's a great player,
but I think the Dallas Mavericks as a team haven't achieved to the level that people thought they would this season to comfortably award him with it. And so now people started looking for other narratives. I actually think that's what happened. And that's why we're looking at Jokic for a third time. But maybe it was wrong for people to be looking at Luka Doncic as a huge favorite. I don't think it was wrong, but I'm just saying maybe we were just giving him just a touch too much credit right out the gate before the season even started.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Narrative is one of those things that you kind of have to wait for it to happen. Luka's scoring 33 a game. He's playing a great season by pretty much every possible definition of the word great.
This is how we fight this white bias. We just give it to Luka. I'm just kidding.
I love that. But he's not the leading scorer, right? His team's not in first in the West. And so where's the argument? Where's the narrative, right? People have so much, they care so much. If people cared a little less about MVP, I think that would really help the conversation.
I actually think the finals MVP should hold more weight. personally.
I think it all should hold less weight. I think everything should hold less weight.
That's fair, but I think that's fair. I mean, I was saying that I think it should hold more weight in that.
More weight relative to the MVP.
Yes, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. More weight relative to the MVP, because the MVP, everyone says it's not a regular season award, but it is, because everyone's voting based on, or at least should be voting based on how the regular season went.
Before the playoffs happened.
Before the playoffs. So it's like, how can you factor in all this playoff success if the playoffs haven't happened yet? So why not just structure it in a way where, again, you're just clearly defining the MVP more and what it is, and then you have a finals MVP, which is essentially the MVP of the playoffs.
If the NBA stopped today, who do you think has a larger contribution in the history of the league? Who's more valuable? Kawhi Leonard, 2-time finals MVP, or Nikola Jokic, 2-time regular season MVP?
Who's had a greater impact on the history of the league?
Okay, that's just okay. I framed it definitions. Who do you think is a better player if the league stopped today, right? Who had a better career?
Well, I mean, the X
you
factor.
Wanted to say finals
No.
MVP,
The X factor to all. No. The X factor to all of that is because of injuries. Like Kawhi Leonard, his impact is less because of injuries.
But you wanted to say finals MVP more important than MVP.
Yeah.
But now faced with 2 versus 2.
No, but you asked me who's the better player.
Oh, but if the league ended today,
that's why I was confused.
Who's had a better career?
Yeah, Kawhi's had a better career. That's no question. Okay. Kawhi has had a better career. But when you were asking me who's the better player today, I'm like, I couldn't say that.
I framed it poorly.
Kawhi. No, it's okay.
Okay, so you stick to your guns. He's had a better career.
Yeah.
There you go. I think that's you know what? I can't disagree with you. I think finals MVP should matter more. But if people were
if everything mattered less, that would be great.
If people were less willing to die for that belief, though, I would love that.
I agree with you on that. I agree that if it all mattered a little less, that would be great.
And if it mattered a little less, maybe people would listen to each other a little more. Because I think if someone says maybe racial bias is impacting this conversation, maybe that conversation could actually be had if people listened. And maybe people would listen if they weren't like, if Nikola Jokic isn't MVP, then it's all explode, right? People care so much. And so the conversations can't even be had.
Yeah, well, not to get too philosophical here, but, the economy of sports is people being irrationally, emotionally invested. That is the whole economy of sports. Like, Stephen A. didn't say that. I said that.
No, his whole...
his whole thing is about that. Yeah.
Is working himself into.
But that's also fandom.
Yeah. And without fandom, you don't have the whole thing anyway.
Right.
So maybe I'm the one not making sense. That's actually a really good point.
That we all have to be emotionally invested for this to work.
Because if you're not, the whole thing falls apart. Yeah. Very good point.
Well, there we go. Are you ready for some?
I'm left with nothing.
Are you ready for some Raptors talk? All right, let's do this. Fred VanVleet, he went off last night. We're recording this on Thursday. As of this recording, I don't know the fines yet. So I'm sorry, we don't have that information as of this recording, but we know it's coming. I mean, maybe I should just give it a quick Google right now.
I don't think it's released yet.
Yeah, just to be, because sometimes things happen while I'm recording.
True. We haven't been going a while.
So we all know the rant. I'm sure we all saw it. He specifically went after referee Ben Taylor for saying that his technical fouls against him have been egregious, have been out of hand. 5 out of his 8 technical fouls that Fred has received this year have been given by Ben Taylor. So, or at least a game that he has officiated.
Yeah, 5 have come in games in which he's officiated. I think 3 were given by Ben Taylor.
Okay, yeah, sorry, thank you.
Yeah.
3 were given by him specifically, and 5 were during games that he officiated out of a total of 8. So he said he's taking it personally. And this is a very intriguing rant to me, not just because it's a player frustrated by the refs, but I really felt, even though there's a lot of expletives in it, that he gave this a lot of thought. I think Fred gave this rant a tremendous amount of thought before he said it, not just for the sake of taking the fine, but for making a point because he was incredibly poised. I felt during this whole thing, even though he's swearing, he's very poised throughout the whole thing. He knows exactly what he's saying. He still took accountability for losing the game itself. He made sure not to blame the refs for losing the game. He called this technical last night against the Clippers a momentum shift. I feel like that's slightly more debatable, but at least it was a momentum shift for him. And yeah, I mean, across the board, like I don't usually look at the comments on things, but this was one where I really wanted to see what fans outside of our Raptors bubble thought, or people outside of our Raptors bubble thought. A lot of people agree with him, like even players, like I saw, Marcus Smart is a little notorious, but he kind of like spoke out defending Fred, and like other people outside of our Raptors bubble, even after that Denver game, spoke out and were defending the Raptors like these are bad calls. And so as a fan, I'm like, oh, that's nice to see. But it's just tough because there's such a lack of accountability for refs. Is that terrible to say?
Well, there's a lack of public accountability, but there actually is a lot of private accountability.
Yes.
Refs do have grading curves, punishments. So there actually is accountability for refs. It's just not released to the public.
And so, it's just this frustration has been building up all season. I think one thing that was frustrating about this clip with Fred was that it wasn't the whole clip that got shared, right? Because he had a response where he actually says what he said to the ref, which was basically like, come on, let's play through the BS. I think he's in that moment. He's just trying to pick up himself up. He's trying to pick up his teammates again. And to get a technical for that, I do feel is extreme. Like you need to be able to let players have some emotion out there.
I agree with you. Speaking about, I think I actually do really respect Fred VanVleet's intellect. I think he has really nuanced and thoughtful perspectives on things. And particularly actually during the George Floyd protests, I thought he was a real thought leader from the sports side of things. So, when Fred talks about things like this, I do listen. He can change my mind about a lot. Now, this is something I don't buy into systemic referee bias, or I didn't. So I need to think about it more.
Okay.
We talk about sample size a lot when we talk about games. One that 3-pointers, for example, particularly high variance things. The sample doesn't reflect someone's true talent, like as a percentage until 750 shots, they say. The sample size of technicals for Fred VanVleet is 8. And technicals, as we've seen, are a really high variance thing. Like, would another ref give VanVleet a technical for saying we need to play through the BS? And he actually said the word. We're saying BS. He didn't. I don't know. So it's very high variance. And 8 is not a lot. So I would need to be convinced that there's a personal bias from Ben Taylor against Fred. But who would know that way better than me is Fred. Because he's the one talking to the guy, right? Like, I'm not on the court. I don't hear the conversations. And refs and players have conversations all the time that we don't see. It's not always Luka Doncic or Scott, turning around and yelling at them. A lot, in timeouts or whatever, they'll have very productive conversations about very specific moments on the court, and they'll go back and forth, and they'll say, oh, you know what, I appreciate the explanation. Or the ref will say, you're right, I didn't actually notice that. I'll pay attention to that detail. That happens all the time. And so Fred's perspective is infinitely more valuable on this than mine, right? And so when he says that he feels like there's a bias, I listen to that. In the same thing, Scott Foster ejecting Scotty Barnes. after 3 or 4 calls, which I thought Nick Nurse spoke about really well. When you review a call like they did with the Scotty Jokic one, it did not get overturned because there was contact. But that's because they isolated that and spent 10 minutes looking at it. If they isolated every single other off-ball screen in the game, guess what? There's contact in every single one of those as well. And so they're comparing the review to the rule book, whereas every other play they're comparing to the game itself. And so they're actually, reviews are taken out of context rather than put into context, which I love that point from Nurse. And that's why players get so frustrated, because Scotty, when he's setting screens, is getting hit. And then he tries to get through a screen and hits the guy, and he's called for a foul when it wasn't a foul before. But they only review the one. So in general, I am a no ref talk guy because we don't have the perspective. It doesn't help the analysis. But I actually think this conversation has been quite interesting. I've learned a lot from Nurse's comments, from what happened to Barnes, and from Van Vliet's comments. I've learned a lot about player relations with refs. I did not know that 5 of Van Vliet's 8 technicals came in games with Ben Taylor. I doubt many people knew that fact. Fred knew. And the fact that Fred knows really is important, because their perspective on this is what matters, right? It's like when you get in a fight with a partner, you don't need to talk about the truth. All you need to talk about is your perspective of the truth. Because your perspective, actually, if you feel like the person's undermining you, doesn't matter if they're undermining you, the way you feel really does matter in human relationships. And it's the same between players and refs. And so this is one of those things where I think my mind was changed a little bit from no ref talk to this is actually a productive ref talk conversation. I don't buy that the Raptors have been unfairly penalized throughout the season. And Fred actually made a point of saying, look, the refs didn't lose that game for us. We lost that game. They did lose the game against the Clippers. That doesn't mean there wasn't an element of uphill battle with that technical, for example, because rhythm matters a lot. So, yeah, one of those things, I thought it was really interesting. Fred's going to get fined. Oh, my God. He might get suspended.
I was thinking that, too. I'm like, he could get suspended.
I've never heard anyone talk like that, but I learned a lot. I'm happy he did. I mean, I'm not the one paying the fine, so I can say I'm happy. Maybe he's not. But, really, really interesting stats, perspectives, facts. Do you remember, this is going to be a tangent, do you remember when Terrence Ross had his game-tying, buzzer-beating three-pointer called off because the scorer started the clock like a fraction of a second late?
No, that's buried somewhere deep in my brain.
This is a long time ago. Anyway, it was I forget if it was home or away. The timekeeper started the clock a fraction of a second late, and the refs were like, well, maybe if it had started on time, then the shot would have been late, so we're going to call it late, which I've never heard this rule before. They waved off a game-tying three, which is insane because if it had been started on time, maybe he would have got the shot up earlier if the clock had been correct.
Yeah.
And it was to me, it still remains the least fair moment of reffing I've ever seen in the NBA. And I'm including Tim Donahue's technicals against Tim Duncan, like including the actual game fixing that happened. The Terrence Ross three still is the thing that I'm most upset about. I don't think anything that's happened over the past 3 days with the Raptors is up to the Terrence Ross three-pointer,
because it didn't directly cost the game,
because it didn't
so
directly
blatantly
cost the game.
Yeah
But it is still a worthwhile conversation, and I've really enjoyed listening to Fred and Nick talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, again, because it was so well thought out, that it has sparked more interesting conversation than it is just someone being angry or frustrated. It's like there's no real like rage in anything he's saying. You know what I mean? Like that's what I mean. Like that's what makes it such a good, frankly, a good moment for him and a good look for him.
He's
and
speaking coolly and thoughtfully.
Yeah, and that's why other like other fans, other players, other journalists even like can can sympathize or like see his point of view, because he did put so much thought into it. And so, yeah, I mean, we still have yet to see what the consequences of that will be. But I think his frustration, if it proves, like, if somebody goes through all the technicals and proves like this was valid, this was valid, this was valid, and then you kind of just throw up your hands and you're like, well, okay. But at least I agree with you. It has sparked a very interesting conversation, and we are learning more about the relationships with the refs and with replays as well.
And to compare to the MVP conversation, this is not a first take show. I mean, it is now, but Fred didn't treat it like a first take show, right? No. And I think it is a more productive conversation because it's actually being held thoughtfully. And all technicals, I should say, are reviewed by the league. All fouls, everything that goes in a box score is reviewed by the league. There's levels of what did you say? Accountability. There's levels of accountability, but I think they review what does happen. They don't review what doesn't happen. And so Fred VanVleet, got a technical from Ben Taylor for throwing the ball into the stanchion. Not hard, not with anger.
Right.
By the letter of the law, that's a technical. And so it wasn't rescinded, right? They called that a correct technical. But how many players throw the ball into the stanchion without anger and don't get a technical? They compare it against what happens. They don't compare it against what doesn't happen. And I think that, to me, is what I've been thinking about, that Nick said and that Fred's been thinking about as well.
Yeah, because that play that you're talking about, I think the show Tim and Friends shared that clip again this morning.
Yes.
Yeah. Earlier in the season, I think it was against the Hawks, where like he threw the ball against the stanchion, but it was really almost like he was trying to regain his balance. Like, I can't even say it wasn't even a throw. It was more like a toss.
Yeah, it didn't look like anger was involved.
Yeah, in any way. And so, yeah, it's kind of like an extreme use of the rule. Like, even with Scotty against the Nuggets, it's like he got it ejected from one comment.
Yeah.
As opposed to,
I've never seen that before.
Right. As opposed to a technical foul, or even just like hey, watch it, buddy. Like, hey, come on, man.
The other
like,
thing, Scotty's a sophomore. Refs can take players aside and say, look, you can't do that. That happens again, I'm ejecting. Like, that's a thing that happens all the time, especially with young players. And so why didn't that happen, right?
Exactly.
And why did Scotty get ejected rather than a quick aside between them, a human conversation, which happens in every other conversation? And so there's a lot to it. And I think the Nuggets game really did feel like Scott Foster finished the game.
Yes,
the Raptors, before Scott Foster finished the game, the Raptors were up by a point. They said Fred should not have had the free throws in the last 2-minute report, which, fine. The Raptors were down by a point before Scott Foster took over. The last 7 points of the game were 5 free throws given by Scott Foster, and then 2 free throws from an intentional foul. That's insane. The game didn't get to end. Like, maybe the Raptors do lose to the Nuggets. They're an exceptional team in the clutch. Nikola Jokic is the best player on the floor. I think the Raptors would have lost. Momentum had the Nuggets ahead. But the game didn't happen. Like, that to me was just extraordinarily frustrating. I had a piece to write. I couldn't publish it because there's nothing to analyze about a game without an ending.
Right.
Very frustrating moment. Into the players, like, I couldn't imagine. They're so much more invested than I am. They must have been fuming.
Yeah, I mean, it was clear that this frustration was boiling over. Like, I was surprised that somebody didn't do that. Not this exactly, but some type of a rant after the Denver game. And I think, there's a clip of Fred being like, I'm going to save my money. And then 2 days later, he's like, I'll take the fine, but let's take a look at this Raptors team now. After this stretch of games here, last week I was trying to be more enthusiastic about the 6th seed, but now we've lost a few in a row here. How do you feel about this team and our play-in perspectives here now.
I think they are at this point maybe as good as they were last season. Last season they were a good team. I think 49 wins, the 5th seed. They were a good team last year, but they couldn't have reeled off a 10-game winning streak on command last season. That's just not something they were capable of doing.
Right.
And this year, with Pirtle in tow, they kind of need to do they said, oh, we need a huge winning streak or we're in the play-in. And they're not able to go on a huge winning streak. They lost a game to Utah, the first game with Pirtle, where Pirtle didn't play great. He seemed nervous. But that they shouldn't have lost. They just collapsed.
Yeah, that game was brutal. Yeah,
that was a rough game. Then they won a bunch of games in a row, and then they lost some games where they didn't play great. That happens. That's what they did last year. They couldn't win on command. They had down games last year, and look, they lost to Denver last year. They lost to the Clippers last year, and so I think they're a good team. I think if they took this roster and started the season again, they're winning between 45 and 50 games with Pirtle on the roster, but they're starting so far behind the 8 ball with so much baggage in terms of we need this. It's easy to win when you're starting on an even footing. When you're starting, we need this win. It's way harder to win. And so they're set back so much that, I think they're really good, not good enough to win on command, not as good as teams like Denver or the Clippers. And we're seeing that. So, they're probably going to close out the season quite well. I do think they're going to go to the playoffs. They're still going to have disappointing losses because they had that last year too.
Yeah. Yeah. The Knicks were winning a lot. And then I was trying to have in my mind, I was trying to have a fantasy where we face the Knicks in the first round.
That would have to be.
I was trying to talk myself into that fantasy, but I don't think it's going to happen. But yeah, I completely agree with you. I do think that's where we're at. I mean, I will say, in terms of like the Pirtle trade happening, I was never team tank during all those conversations, but we were like consistently 12th in the East for a long time there. And now with the Pirtle trade, I believe we're 9th right now, but only one back behind 8th. And this one move alone has drastically helped us. It really has. We just needed a starting center, and it just took so long to find one. Yeah. So, I mean, I just feel like we are so much better off than we were. Even though some of these games have been frustrating, we've been in these games more than we have been. And I don't know. I still, I definitely still think we're going to be in the play-in. I'm not looking at the 6th seed like I was a week ago. I mean, the Nets have won 3 in a row after losing 4 in a row. So they've clearly figured something out here. And we do have a tough schedule. I'm going to be at the Nuggets game next week in person just for fun. Nuggets revenge game. Didn't know it was going to be a revenge game, but now it feels like Nuggets revenge game.
Do we know who's reffing?
No, I don't know how to look. I don't know how to look that up.
I don't know if that's announced this far ahead of time. But I mean, a lot of people are very frustrated, and the Raptors still remain a team with flaws. Obviously, big flaws. Like, they're not a championship contender, and I think there's a big space between this team is a lot better and this team is fixed. Like, there's a huge space in between there, and the Raptors are smack dab in the middle. They're not fixed. There's still a lot of issues. They need shooting. They need rim pressure. They need more guards. They need the defense has been better. Could tighten up. Still too many blow-bys. Like, I could go on and on and on. The rotation, and yet they're still good. They're still probably an above 500 team. They're way more fun to watch. Just the experience of watching them is completely different.
Yeah. Like, if we get to a point where we're 500 this season, I'm going to be so proud of us. Yeah. Because that is really turning things around.
Yeah. They're 30. Yeah, 3 games back, 32 and 35. I assume like I would bet they're going to reach 500, right? 3 games back with a month left to play. They're going to reach 500.
Yeah, it just feels like such a, maybe I'm overstating it, but it just feels like a huge accomplishment compared to where we were literally in January.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Completely agree.
Lewis, it is time for our Raptors Hottie Highlight of the week. And, but it was going to actually go back to Nick Nurse because he's in a Sun Life commercial.
Big shot.
But after last night's rant, I'm sorry, it's Fred. It's Fred, and it is this rant that we have also just ranted about for a solid 10 minutes. Call it my toxic trait. I don't care. I woke up to it this morning, timeline full, and I was like, this is hot. So I'm sure not the only one who thought that. So Fred VanVleet, you get my Raptors Hottie Highlight of the week. Congrats.
Being emotional, but expressing it unemotionally is a cool move.
Yeah, I agree. It's a boss move.
That's my take. And being a boss is hot.
Here's hoping that he doesn't actually get suspended or something, but we'll see. I hate that we don't have that info in time of this recording, which is on Thursday afternoon, but this episode comes out every Friday. Thank you, Lewis, so much for joining me this week. We had a lot of very thoughtful, philosophical conversations, which I really appreciate. Some weeks are really lighthearted and some weeks are a bit more serious. So I appreciate all your insights.
Yeah, pleasure. I mean, I don't talk about this stuff on social media because character count, and you just can't have. I haven't found an ability to have that conversation in an interesting, enjoyable, and productive manner. So really, really nice to be able to talk with you about it in an interesting, enjoyable, and productive manner.
Oh, well, anytime. Lewis, I'm sure all our listeners already know what you're up to and where to find you. But if anyone doesn't, let us know where we can find you and what you're up to. Are we frozen?
Sorry. Yeah, I had to think about this. You can find me on Twitter. Just my name, Lewis Zatzman. You can see it right there. Right for 538. I'm going to be doing some college coverage coming up for March Madness, which is really exciting. I write about the Milwaukee Bucks as well for the Bucks. I have a piece I'm going to be posting on my Twitter as soon as this episode is, yesterday, because this comes out tomorrow, about the winning streak. So yeah, lots of really cool, fun stuff going on.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. An absolute pleasure and joy. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.